and then you will have an activity later, but it will be due pa po ng 11:59 p.m. So you have plenty of time to do it, and it's very easy. And then you will have a quiz at 9:30 to 10 a.m. So ayun po. Quiz and activity po ang ating assessments for today. So let's start with our discussion. So CRAD 212 is about institutional corrections, and nabanggit naman natin last time sa ating orientation na we have parang two kinds. We have institutional and then we have non-institutional or community-based corrections. So for this particular course, magfo-focus po tayo dun sa institutional-based. Ibig sabihin, yung process, yung history, yung concepts and principles when it comes to rehabilitating offenders inside institutions na considered as prisons or jails. So yun po ang ifo-focus ng course na to, which is institutional corrections. So of course, we will be discussing first the historical perspective on corrections like any other introductory part of courses natin dito sa iba't ibang subjects sa criminology. So kung mapapansin nyo, madalas when it comes to the parang theoretical subjects, we always try to start it with how this particular practice was developed, and then paano yung naging history niya all throughout the ancient times up to the present day. Ayan. I think you are very familiar dito sa nakikita nyo, which are the early codes that are related to corrections. So first is the Babylonian and the Sumerian codes. So sa Babylonian Code, ayan, it was codified during the reign of King Hammurabi. So it's also called as Code of King Hammurabi, which is credited as the oldest codified law sa buong mundo. And we know na it prescribes savage and brutal punishment. So ano yung legal principle ng Babylonian Code natin? It's lex talionis, which is an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. So bakit nandyan yung mga Sumerian codes? So if you still remember, the Sumerian leaders Epitstar and Lipitstar and Shuma, sila po yung parang nag-set ng standards kung ano yung mga actions which are considered as offenses against society. However, bakit hindi sila yung kinonsider na parang merong pinaka-oldest codified law? Kasi their form of writing, which is cuneiform, hindi pa siya totally deciphered ng mga experts natin, no? And parang hindi pa sila nakakita ng concrete evidence that this particular civilization, which are the Sumerian, really had yung mga set of standards of actions that are considered offenses against the society. But historians believe that Sumerian codes were nearly 100 years older than the code of King Hammurabi. And then we have the Roman and Greek codes. So we have the Justinian Code. Ayon, kung natatandaan nyo pa yung sa lead 112 natin na Corpus Juris Civilis, di ba? Or literally meaning body of law. So it's a collection of all laws in the Roman Empire. So that's actually also called as the Justinian Code. So it is an effort to match a desirable amount of punishment to all possible crimes. However, itong code na to, it did not survive due to the fall of the Roman Empire. And then we have the 12 tables. So this is still in ancient Rome, and it was codified by the decemviri natin or decemvirates. So sila po yung nagsulat at gumawa ng 12 tables. So ano ba ang nakapaloob sa 12 tables? So iba-iba actually, no? We have marriage customs, ayan, property owners, building codes, and so on. So medyo mas specific ang nakapaloob ng mga batas sa 12 tables or tinatawag na 12 tabulae. So this was incorporated also into the Corpus Juris Civilis during the reign of Justinian I. And the 12 tables is the foundation of all public and private law of the Romans until Justinian. And then we have the Greek code of Draco. So this particular one is known to provide harsh punishments to both citizens and slaves as it incorporates primitive concepts. So what are those primitive concepts? Vengeance or paghihigante or blood feud. Say for example, between the family. So halimbawa, itong family na to, yung isang member nila nakagawa ng kasalanan dun sa other person in the community. And then that particular victim's family, ayan, sila na yung magkakaroon ng parang feud with the family nung gumawa ng offense. So Greeks were the first society to allow any citizen to prosecute the offender in the name of the injured party. This particular law naman, which is the Burgundian Code, ayan, parang it classified yung mga offenses and also the punishment based on the social class of offenders. So we have three particular social classes. We have the nobles, ayan, yung mga medyo nakakataas talaga, no, yung mga mayayaman. And then we have the middle class and the lower class. So each specifying the value of life according to social status. So that's under the Burgundian Code. So medyo, itong code na to, nagdi-discriminate siya. Kung mahirap ka lang, tas medyo okay-okay, at medyo mayaman or nakakataas ka. So dumidepende daw yung offenses and also punishment depending on your social class. So it's actually not equal or fair to all of the people. Unlike the Greek Code of Draco, di ba? Sa Greek Code of Draco, either you are a citizen or a slave, punishment are always equal. Pero dito sa Burgundian Code, it looks at your social status as a person. Now we go in the Philippines. So we have Código Penal. So Código Penal is what we know as the revised penal code in the present. So the Spanish Civil Code became effective in the Philippines on December 7, 1889. And then yung mga conquistadores, they were the one who introduced yung Código Penal, or yan yung kasabay na na-introduce ng Código Penal. So it is adopted with the Roman law principles, COCIA, or tinatawag na principles of the Roman law. So anong tawag dun sa principles of Roman law? COCIA po. And dyan po parang yung na-pattern ang Código Penal na hanggang ngayon is ginagamit na natin. But of course, with revision to fit the needs of time. And then, bago tayo sinakop ng mga Kastila, syempre meron na tayong mga datu during the barangay or balangay period. So we have first, Code of Calansiao, which is considered as the most extensive and severe law that prescribes harsh punishment. And then we have the Maragtas Code, written by Datu Sumakwel. So sa Maragtas Code, parang yan yung bawal maging tamad during Datu Sumakwel's time. So dapat meron ka parusahan kapag you deliberately refuse to work in the fields, ayan, yung parang ayaw mong magtanim, ayan. O kaya naman, ayaw mong magbantay ng livestock. So that is punishable under the Code of Datu Sumakwel or the Maragtas Code. So the lazy person should be arrested and should be punished. So isa yun sa mga nasa Maragtas Code. And then pagnanakaw, nasa Maragtas Code din po yan. So ano nagiging punishment? Dito naman sa code na to, the fingers of the teeth will be cut off. So those are some of the examples na nakapaloob sa Maragtas Code written by Datu Sumakwel. And then we have the Sikatuna Law. So this was written by Datu Sikatuna of Bohol. So this already exists even though wala pa yung mga Spaniards sa Pilipinas. So that's why it's pre-Spanish law. So sabi ko nga, yung law enforcement noon, law enforcement started really informally kasi it started with families and then na-apply sa mga clans and tribes, and then after that, it also applied to countries and nations. So if you still remember, yun na, yung sa lead 112 natin, meron tayong king's policing, and then we have warriors policing, and then we have king's policing. So it's like what happened in the Philippines. So it's possible that during ancient times, sa king's policing yan, family members pa lang. And then warriors policing during the barangay or barangay period, kung saan meron na silang datu as the head of the barangay. And then dumating yung king's policing in form of the Spaniards. Kasi nga, the King of Spain, ayan, sila yung nagutos na sakupin ang iba't ibang bansa kasama na yung Pilipinas. So this was in the person of Ferdinand Magellan. So that's in the Philippines. So early corrections period reaches 2000 BC hanggang 19th century. So we had two changes that shaped the evolution of correction. So first, we have shifted from vigilante justice to government justice. And the second change was we have shifted from physical punishment to psychological punishment. So first muna, yung unang change that shaped corrections. So first is vigilante justice to government justice. So what is vigilante justice? So when we say vigilante, these are people that takes matters in their own hands, especially justice, no, because they feel na yung mga authorized person to do so are inadequate. So when we talk about vigilante justice during the earlier times, yan yung retaliation or revenge ng either victim mismo or ng family or relatives ng victim. So a victim or a victim's family would seek revenge for a crime. So that's vigilante justice. Wala pang gobyerno na nagpaparusa sa mga crimes or offenses committed by persons in the society. So from vigilante justice, ayan nga, vengeance and blood feuds, nag-shift tayo into government justice. So the government owned the crime and bears the responsibility for punishing the criminals. So that's why, kung nakakabasa kayo ng mga records sa court, so it's like people of the Philippines versus Juan de la Cruz. So it's no longer the victim versus the offender, because under government justice, it's like you are committing or you have committed an offense against the individual and also against the state or the government. So the government owned the crime in the sense na kapag nakapag-commit ng krimen ang isang tao, ang gobyerno po or ang state or ang nation ang may responsibility na magbigay ng karampatang parusa para sa kriminal na yon. So that's a very parang different from vigilante justice, di ba? Kasi vigilante, it's like family or the individual who is considered as the victim takes justice into their own hands. Pero sa government justice, ayan, parang mas formal na. Actually, it became formal kasi yun nga, the government or the state has the responsibility to provide the punishment for the criminal. So that's the first change that shaped the evolution of correction in the early times. And then we have the second one, shift from physical punishment to psychological punishment. So during parang mga ancient times, like for example, medieval times, yung physical punishment is parang pinaka-practice nila as a form of punishing. So ancient and barbaric forms of torture are used as punishment. So, halimbawa, beheading, ayan, yung nakikita niyo sa picture, o kaya naman hanging, and other different forms of torture or punishment. So we have what we call corporal punishment, which is any kind of physical punishment meant to inflict pain or discomfort. So it's either to make sure that this person gets the lesson na o kapag nag-commit ka ng crime, ito yung magiging kapalit. So that's under corporal punishment. Kasi when you experience pain, you try to avoid it as much as possible. So that's under physical punishment. We have corporal punishment and capital punishment. So remember that. When we say corporal punishment, yan yun. That is when you inflict any kind of physical pain para maka-feel ng pain yung isang tao. So kapag sinabi naman natin capital punishment, yan yung parang death penalty. So that particular punishment leads to the death of a person. So that's the difference between corporal punishment and capital punishment. So under physical punishment, it has the principle of deterrence. So the philosophy of deterrence, where if people are humiliated or injured, they will not commit another crime, and they serve as examples to the public. So if you still remember your lessons in theories, ayan, when we say deterrence, we have two kinds, diba? We have general deterrence, and then we have specific deterrence. So general is meant for the public to fear na, kapag pala gumawa ako ng krimen, ganyan ang mangyayari sa akin. Kasi kay Juan de la Cruz, ganito ang naging parusa. So that's general deterrence. And then when we say specific deterrence, this is when you are the person who experienced the punishment itself. So ikaw yung kriminal na naparusahan, and because of that, because you have already experienced how hard the punishment is, maiisip mo na hindi ka na dapat umulit na gumawa pa ng krimen kasi you no longer want to experience that kind of pain or suffering. So that's the purpose and the principle of deterrence. It's like pinipigilan ka ng mag-commit ng crime bago ka pa man parang gumawa ng actions to commit those crimes because of the existing punishment that you don't want to experience. And then we have shifted from physical punishment to psychological punishment. So when we say psychological punishment, it is developed under the philosophy of incapacitation. Dito yung tinatanggalan ka ng parang opportunity to commit a crime. So incapacitation usually comes in the form of imprisoning or imprisonment of criminal offenders. So the principle of incapacitation is when a criminal can't commit crimes if he or she doesn't have access. So totoo nga naman, kung nasa loob ka ng kulungan, ayan, paano ka pa makakapag-commit ng further crimes? Except kung merong criminal activities din sa loob ng jails or prison. But the general concept is, ayun nga, psychological punishment. Hindi lang yung you are unable to commit crimes, but also malayo ka from, say for example, your family members, your loved ones. So parang, kasi kapag psychologically, that has an effect also. And yun nga, yung you cannot commit crimes kasi 'di ba, in crime commission, meron parang tatlong element. So we have motive, we have opportunity, and then we have instrumentation. So yung motive, yes, pwede pa rin nandyan yan. Hindi pa rin matatanggal yan kahit makulong ka. So anong natatanggal madalas? It's the opportunity to commit a crime. Kasi sinong bibiktimahin mo sa loob ng kulungan? So, limbawa, isa kang magnanakaw ng laptop, so kaya ng cellphone, o kaya hold-upper ka. So, sinong hold-upin mo sa loob ng kulungan ay para-parehas kayong walang sariling perang hawak. So, that's the principle of incapacitation under psychological punishment. So, sa physical punishment, it embodies the principle of deterrence kasi nakakatakot nga naman na kapag you are humiliated or executed in public. And then sa psychological punishment naman is the principle of incapacitation. Next. We discuss physical punishment. Now, syempre, applicable din na i-discuss natin ano ba yung mga ancient forms of punishment. So, sabi ko nga kanina, pag sinabing capital punishment, then that is death penalty. So, during the ancient times, ayan, yung mga forms of capital punishment is by burning, beheading, hanging, breaking at the wheels, pillory, and other forms of medieval execution. So, ito pong unang picture that's actually beheading. So, madalas kung mahilig kayong manood ng mga movies, no? Lalong-lalo na yung mga parang set in the medieval era. Ayan. So, when we say beheading, they use swords, o kaya naman an axe, ayan. O kaya yung parang garote, if you are able to watch those. So, that is beheading. And then we have burning. Ayan. So, parang itatali ka sa isang pole and then sa baba mo is kahoy and other materials that easily burns. So, naniniwala sila, sinasabi noon na yung mga parang naakusahan of witchcraft, di ba? They are the persons being burned at the stake. So, that's a form of capital punishment. And then we have hanging. Ayan, pagbibitay. And then we have breaking at the wheels. If you can see that particular image, kung saan medyo anong tawag dito? Naka-angle na yung tao. Tapos merong parang wheel. So, yan po yun. Continuously na iniikot hanggang yung bones mo ay mag-break and then hanggang sa mamatay ka. And then they have another form of breaking at the wheels, no? So, meron ding wheel. Ayan, itatali yung katawan mo. So, parang naka-stretch ang inyong legs and arms. And then, ipapaikot din po yung wheel hanggang sa mag-break na yung mga bones mo. And then we have pillory, the last picture. Ayan. So, parang nakakulong yung kamay at ulo mo. So, you will die because of actually natural causes, dehydration, ayan, lack of food, ayan, o kaya naman yung mga wild animals is they will attack you. So that's pillory. And the stock, so it's called pillory and the stock. Kung pati yung paa po is parang restrict or naka-restrain on a wooden device. So that's pillory or pillory at these stocks. And those are the forms of medieval executions considered as capital punishment. Next is physical torture or, yun nga, yung na-discuss natin kanina, corporal punishment. So examples of corporal punishment is maiming, mutilation, whipping, and other inhumane or barbaric forms of inflicting pain. So maiming and mutilation are similar but very different also. So this is the cutting off of a body part. So what's the difference between maiming and mutilation? So maiming is kung yung body part na yon is kahit mawala, you can still do your daily functions. Kapag mutilation naman, kapag tinanggal, pinutol yung particular body part na yon, parang nawawalan ka or na makaka-apekto yun sa daily activities mo as a person. So say for example, mutilation of the ear. Ayan. So syempre makaka-apekto yan. And then what else? Mutilation of the hands. Both hands, ha? So makaka-apekto din po. Ayan. So that's the difference between maiming and mutilation. And then whipping, yung may latigo. So yun po yun. And other inhumane and barbaric forms of punishment or infliction of pain. And then we have social degradation or what we call branding din po. So this is putting the offender into shame or humiliation. So ito yung noong kasing unang panahon, when you have this particular sign in your body, so you are branded, merong meaning yon. And madalas, hindi maganda yung meaning of branding. It means na yun nga, isa kang criminal, and then other one is labeling of the person. So if you can see the other picture, ayan, parang meron siyang placard na may nakasulat. It's possible that it's for the crime he or she committed. So that's social degradation. So you humiliate ka because of the crime you committed, and since you don't want humiliation, especially in the public, di ba? Isa rin siyang form of punishment. And then this one is not really harsh, pero it's considered still as a punishment, which is banishment or exile, ostracism, and outlawry. So this is sending or putting away of an offender, which was carried out either by prohibition against coming into a specified territory where the offender has been removed. So this practice during the ancient times is also similar to what we practice today, which is called destierro. So banishment kasi it's like hindi ka na pwede pumunta. Halimbawa, sabi nila, hindi ka na pwedeng tumapak sa loob ng San Fernando City because of the crime you committed. So that's banishment or exile. O yung exile is yung ipapadala ka into another island. So ipapatapon ko doon. And you will live the rest of your life there. So that's exile, I mean. And then when we have when we say ostracism, yan yung parang invisible ka sa society. Even though you're there, hindi ka nila pinapansin, it's like you do not exist. So that's ostracism. So how is this similar to destierro? So when we say destierro kasi it's example na crime natin na madalas is destierro ang punishment. It's that yung kapag meron kang asawa and then umuwi ka sa bahay, nakita mo at nahuli mo na may kasama siyang iba, ayan, na mayroon silang ginagawang milagro, ayan. Tapos napatay mo sila pareho, ayun po. So madalas po kapag napatunayan na it's a crime of passion, it's not actually imprisonment, no? It's destierro lang. Or you are not allowed within the area of a particular radius dun sa crime or where the crime happened. So, ganun po yung destierro, which is similar to this practice. Kasi, di ba, you are not allowed to, for example, sa banishment nga, hindi ka na allowed tumapak sa loob ng San Fernando City. So, ganun po. It's similar to the practice of banishment and destierro that we have today. By the 18th century, dun na nangyari yung shift from physical punishment to psychological punishment. And since nag-shift na into psychological punishment, ano yung mas naging famous practice or popular practice when it comes to punishing criminals? It's imprisonment. So the early prisons in the 16th and 17th centuries were used more like jails. So jails in a sense na hanggat wala pang punishment si person, doon siya ikinukulong. And then 18th century prisons naman this time are used for long-term confinement. So it's the similar practice that we have today because jails and prisons are different. So jails is usually for people who are undergoing investigation, ayan, awaiting trial, or undergoing trial, or awaiting final judgment. So, yun ang madalas na purpose ng jails, lalong-lalo na dito sa Pilipinas, no? When we say prisons, doon naman po, nagsaserve na yung mga convicted offenders. So, generally. So, when we say prison, ibig sabihin, hindi na yan nag-undergo ng trial and so on, but they are already convicted and serving their punishment for the crime they committed. So it's like the same practice, no, during 16th and 17th centuries and then 18th century. So in England, criminals were often sentenced to transportation. So when we say transportation, yung mga offenders, hindi na sila pinapayagang bumalik ng England at ipinapatapon sila sa mga British colonies like the America and other countries. So imagine, America was actually a British colony before. So the practice ended when si US or si America, they tried to fight for their independence and they won. So doon po nag-end yung transportation practice ni England. And then the philosophy of incapacitation, which was discussed earlier, is where a criminal can commit crimes if he or she doesn't have access. So wala siyang opportunity to commit the crimes that he is motivated to commit those. Hindi niya po magagawa kasi nga walang oportunidad para gawin yung mga krimen na yon. So that's the philosophy of incapacitation. Next. During 13th century naman po, yung mga offenders, they can avoid punishment for a period of 40 days when they claim refuge in a church. But by the end of 40 days, ayan, they will be compelled to leave and face their punishment. And during 1468, torture as a form of punishment in England was very popular. During 16th century, yun nga, nag-start yung transportation. So transportation relieve overcrowding of prisons, which is actually problem pa rin natin in modern times or in the present times, di ba? Kasi we all know na overcrowded ang mga jails and prisons natin. So during 16th century, that also happened. And one way of relieving that particular problem is yun nga, transportation. Hindi na sila ikukulong pero ipapadala sila sa ibang lugar at hindi na sila pwedeng bumalik sa England. And then in the 17th century, late 18th century, death penalty became prevalent as a form of punishment. So capital punishment, very popular during those times. This is what we were talking about, no? The transportation. So we have the gaols or jails, and then we have the galleys, and then we have the hulks. So gaols is the parang bottom right corner picture, which is a pre-trial detention facility operated by an English sheriff. So this is the jail that we know today. So that's an example, yung bottom right picture natin. So gaol ang tawag dati sa kanila. And then we have galleys. Ayan. These are long, low, narrow, single-deck ships propelled by sails, usually crewed by criminals. So single-deck is yung parang normal boat lang, hindi kamukha ng mga ibang ships na merong pinaka-bottom deck and then meron sa gitna and then meron sa pinaka-taas. So this time, yung mga galleys, they are single-deck ships and sino ang nagpapaandar sa mga galleys na yan? So these are rowed by criminals. Yan po yung sa bottom left picture naman po. And then we have the hulks, which are also called as floating hells. So these are decrepit transport, which are before warships, tapos hindi na gumagana, palutang-lutang na lang sa bodies of water. So they are called floating hells kasi po, ang living conditions in hulks is mas masahol pa sa daga, kumbaga nga. So, wala silang adequate food, ayan, hygiene ng mga prisoners is hindi na nasusunod, and then walang clean access to water, ayan. So, wala pong mga parang, yung mga basic needs of human, hindi na natutupad o kaya hindi na-meet in the hulks. That's why they are called floating hells. So those are the modes or the transportation practice na very prevalent in England during the earlier 16th and 17th centuries. So we have the gaols, the galleys, and the hulks. So after 16th, 17th, and early 18th century came the age of Enlightenment. So 18th century, particularly late 18th century, is a century of change. So it is the period of recognizing human dignity. So dito na nag-start na ma-realize ng mga philosophers, ng mga scholars na, oh, this punishment are very brutal, are very harsh, and they actually don't serve a purpose. So yun ang mga sinabi ng mga philosophers and then ng mga scholars during the late 18th century. So that's why the Reformation movement, when it comes to correctional policies and also crime, started during the 18th century. So it also introduced certain reforms in the correctional field and changed the old philosophy of punishment to a more humane treatment of criminals. That's why it's called Age of Enlightenment. So parang nagising, naliwanagan, ayan, yung mga tao na this particular practice, they are very inhumane and they inflict harm and they inflict pain or suffering without a purpose. So 1876 to 1880 is considered as the golden age of penology. So diyan na nagsilabasan na yan, sila Cesar Beccaria, and then we also have John Howard, ayan. So madidiscuss din natin sila as personalities in the history of correction on the succeeding slides. So, question so far, meron ba? Or natulog na ulit ang mga kabataang Pilipino? Ayan. So, kung may tanong po tayo, ayan. So, wag mahiyang mag-raise hand. So, this is very easy lang naman because it's history, no? But if you don't understand anything or if you don't understand a certain topic, so, mag-raise hand lang po tayo at sasagutin natin yan. Now, let's discuss who are the personalities or pioneers in correction. So first we have William Penn. So he is responsible for the abolition of death penalty and tortures during his time. And he is the first leader to prescribe imprisonment as correctional treatment. So na-realize niya na death penalty, very harsh, very brutal, and also torture, syempre, when you inflict pain na for the sake of punishment only and for no other reason. So sabi ni William Penn, no, tama na. So yun po. Sabi ni William Penn, mas maganda siguro na we are imprisoning offenders as a correctional treatment. So that's William Penn. And then you have Charles Montesquieu. So he is a French historian and philosopher. So he also believed that harsh punishment would undermine morality. So against din po siya sa mga harsh and savage and severe punishment against individual who committed an offense. Next, we have Voltaire. So he's the most versatile philosopher during the 18th century. And he believes that fear of shame was a deterrent to crime. So kung ang mga tao is parang na-humiliate or parang may hiya talaga, ibig sabihin, that can be a deterrent or parang pigil factor when it comes to the commission of crime. Kasi maiisip ng tao, kapag naparusahan ako, malalaman ng public. Kapag naparusahan ako, nakakahiya naman kasi malalaman nila na nag-commit ako, for example, ng robbery. Ayan. So, ganun ang concept ni Voltaire. And he fought the legality-sanctioned practice. And then, this person, very familiar with you, Cesar Bonessa Marchesa de Beccaria. So, diba, siya si father of criminology. And he wrote the book, An Essay on Crimes and Punishment, which presented humanistic goals when it comes to addressing crimes and criminals. And this another person is also familiar. So, si Jeremy Bentham. Diba? Siya nga yung nag-design ng panopticon prison. Yan yung parang merong pinakagitna is parang around or circular building kung saan ang guard is nagkakaroon siya ng 360 vision of all the cells inside the prison. So that's the panopticon prison. And then he also formulated the felicific calculus. This is when you try to calculate yung parang mga pleasure and pain na may experience mo on a particular action. So parang iniisip mo, ano kaya ang mas mabigat? So ano kaya ang chances na this is a risk or this is a benefit. So yun po yung felicific calculus ni Jeremy Bentham. And he is considered as the greatest leader in the reform of English criminal. So he believes that whatever punishment designed to negate whatever pleasure or gain the criminal derives from crime, the crime rate would go down. Yan yung utilitarian principle nila, na kapag nakita or kapag ang punishment sa isang crime is parang mas mabigat kesa dun sa makukuhang benefit ng isang kriminal kung sakaling magko-commit siya ng crime, is mapipigilan na mag-commit ng crime ang isang tao. Kasi iisipin nila na ganito lang ang makukuha ko sa particular crime na to. However, the punishment is very parang severe. Ayan. O kaya naman, mas mabigat pa yung punishment na, for example, pag nagnakaw ako ng 100 pesos, yung kapalit niyan is 1 year na pagkakakulong. So, maiisip nila, is the benefit worth the risk? So, yun ang sinasabi or naging concept ni Jeremy Bentham when it comes to the crime rates going down because criminals are being deterred na mas mabigat ang punishment kesa sa benefit na makukuha. And then we have John Howard, so he's the sheriff of Bedfordshire who devoted his life and fortune to prison reform. So ang ginawa ni John Howard is naglibot siya sa halos lahat ng prison facilities sa kanyang area or sa kanyang lugar. So nakita niya yung mga iba't ibang problems that need to be addressed inside prisons and jails. So after that, he recommended first single cells for sleeping. So dapat bawat nakakulong parang nakapiit sila sa tigi-isa-isang selda, hindi yung may kasama sila. And then, segregated dapat ang mga kababaihan at kabataan from adult male offenders. And then sabi ni John Howard, dapat naman malinis pa rin yung mga kulungan natin. So these are still people. So we should always treat them as human. So that's why nagkaroon siya ng provision of sanitation facilities. And he abolished the fee system. Parang kapag nakulong ka, is kailangan mo pa rin magbayad. So that's the fee system noon. So those are the recommendation ni John Howard after ng paglilibot niya sa iba't ibang prison sa kanyang lugar. And then we have Elam Linz. So he is the warden of the Auburn prison system and Sing Sing prison. He is one of the influential persons sa Amerika in the development of prisons, but he is also known to provide brutal punishment and degrading procedures sa mga prisoners niya. So kinatatakutan po si Elam Linz kasi parang wala siyang patawad at brutal siya magparusa. Ito yon yung dalawang prison na yung isa system, yung isa facility na kung saan related si Elam Linz. So first is the Auburn system, which is also called as the congregate system. So this system sa loob ng prison is when prisoners work during the day and then during the night naman po they are confined in their own cells and complete silence was enforced. So ibig sabihin sa Auburn prison kapag umaga nagtatrabaho ang mga nakakulong and then kapag gabi naman po is nasa loob na sila ng kanya-kanyang kulungan at bawal gumawa ng ingay. And then si Sing Sing Correctional Facility is an example of Auburn prison system. So si Sing Sing is a maximum security prison located in Ossining, New York. And it is notable for their harsh condition and harsh punishment. Kasi nga, di ba, si Elam Linds, yung parang director of correctional facility na yan. And it is originally known as Mount Pleasant Prison. After ng mga personalities natin during the 18th century, ayan, now we go to the reformatory movement. So, pinakauna po sa listahan natin is si Alexander Maconochie. He is considered as the father of parole in Australia. And he is the first to introduce mark system, which is parang forerunner ng tinatawag nating good conduct time allowance in today's time or GCTA. Kasi ano ba ang mark system? This is when a prisoner is required to earn a number of marks based on proper department, labor, and study in order to entitle him a ticket. Ticket po yan for leave or conditional release. So, yun yung parang kapag you display good behavior, ayan, o kaya naman you join yung mga iba't ibang programs sa loob ng kulungan, nagkakaroon ka ng mga marks. And then, kapag sapat na yung mga marks na yun, you have a ticket of leave or a conditional release. So, it's like GCTA, di ba? Kapag sa GCTA, nakaka-earn ka ng mga months because of good behavior, nababawasan din po yung mga araw nun sa original prison sentence mo. So, that's why it's the forerunner din po ng GCTA natin, which is the mark system. And then we have Manuel Montesinos. So, he is the director of prisons in Valencia, Spain. And then siya naman po ang nagpasimula where he divided the number of prisoners into companies with appointed petty officers in charge. So, yan yung parang mga, I think it's called, I forgot the term. I'll check, no? Pero, di ba sa bawat selda, dito sa Philippine jails and prison, parang meron silang head. So, ano kasi ang tawag dun sa head na yon?
Mayor po.
Sure ba yan? So, I think it's mayor, di ba? Tama ako, no? Tama, no, guys?
Yes, ma'am.
Oo, yun siya yung parang may good behavior din and then siya yung parang leader, di ba? Ng mga selda. So tama naman pala ako. Nag-second thought ako. Okay. So the head, it's like in the Philippine jails and prison nga. It's like the mayor, ayan, ng loob ng selda. So that's like the concept of Manuel Montesinos na i-divide niya yung prisoners into companies and then meron silang kanya-kanyang officers in charge. Now we have Domets of France. So siya naman po, nag-focus siya sa mga delinquent boys and he established an agricultural colony kung saan parang boarding school ng mga delinquent na kabataang lalaki. So delinquent boys yan yung mga minors pa lang sila, but they have already engaged in crime or committed the crime. So, ang ginawa ni Domets of France, ayan, nagtayo siya ng agricultural colony kung saan itong mga delinquent boys na to, nagtatrabaho sila in the fields to learn skills, ayan, and actually to serve as punishment also. And then we have Sir Evelyn Ruggles Bryce. So he is the director of English prisons who opened the Borstal Institution. Ang Borstal Institution po is for young offenders and is considered as the best reform institution for young offenders today. So Borstal is like parang rehabilitation for youth that we have today po. So nagfo-focus po sila sa mga juveniles and then isa itong institution na considered as yun nga forerunners ng juvenile detention centers or rehabilitation centers for youth. So he also established the New York House of Refuge, which is the first juvenile reformatory in the United States. This other person naman po is the father of parole in Ireland. So kanina, si Maconochie, he's the father of parole in Australia. Ito namang si Walter Crofton, father of parole in Ireland. So he also introduced the Irish system, which is a modified mark system. And meron siyang progressive mark system, ticket of leave, and he called that the Irish system. Pero nauna talaga si Alexander Maconochie, which is the mark system. So ginaya at pinattern ito ni Walter Crofton at inapply sa mga Irish prisons. And then we have Zebulon Brockway. So he is the director of the Elmira Reformatory in New York and is considered as the modern type of prison during his time. So he introduced certain innovational programs like first, training school types, and then casework methods, extensive use of parole, and indeterminate sentence. So indeterminate sentence, yan yung po yung mga sentences na walang specific duration kung kailan mag-end. Say for example, ang isang sentence na sinabi 10 to 15 years, that is an example of an indeterminate sentence. Kasi you do not know kung pwede ka nang ma-release in 10 years, 11, 12, 13, or 15. So para siyang merong range, kumbaga, pag sinabing indeterminate sentence. So that is introduced during the time of Zebulon Brockway. Still with Zebulon Brockway and Elmira Reformatory, which is also called The Hill. So it is the forerunner of modern penology, sabi ko nga kanina, because of its implementation of the elements of a modern system. So isipin nyo, parang meron silang training school. So kung mapapansin nyo, di ba, in our jails and prisons, meron tayong mga ganyan, mga parang work and livelihood program kung saan nagde-develop ng skills ang mga nasa loob ng kulungan na maaari nilang gamitin once na nakalabas sila. So prisoners work during the day and at night received education or vocational training. So that's an element of modern correctional system. And then Brockway allowed prisoners to earn points by learning technical skills or completing educational assignments like GCTA. And then this particular points or earning of points system led to the early release through a formalized parole program. That's why the Elmira Reformatory is considered as the forerunner of modern penology. We discussed Auburn prison system kanina. So, meron siyang rival prison system. Si Pennsylvania prison system. Hindi po sila correctional institution, ha? System sila na ipinapatupad sa mga correctional institutions noon. So, si Auburn, magkaiba kay Pennsylvania. Kasi, sabi ko nga kanina, Auburn prison system, they work during the day and then during the night, they are confined in solitary cells. So it was believed sa Auburn prison system that hard labor was productive, healthy, and prepare inmates for a better transition once they go back into the society. Kasi may point ka naman kung alam nila yung mga iba't ibang parang mga trabaho na pwede nilang magamit paglabas nila ng kulungan, then that will be very helpful for them and very productive. So during the night naman, they are sent individually to solitary cells. And then sa Pennsylvania, ito ang pagkakaiba. This is also known as the separate system, and it's a method of introspection and repentance. So si Auburn, remember, introspection and hard labor. Si Pennsylvania naman, introspection and repentance. Repentance how? So introspection, kasi nakakulong lang sila day and night in solitary confinement cell. So they are kept in complete solitude their entire sentence. And then repentance, kasi they are given a Bible and expected na mag-reflect sa anong ginawa nilang kasalanan at pagsisihan yun. So that's the Pennsylvania prison system. So kung kayo makukulong, I think I will prefer yung may hard labor during the day, di ba? Kasi kesa nakakulong ka lang every day of your life hanggang sa matapos yung sentence mo, mas malaki yung psychological impact ng nasa Pennsylvania prison system. So these are the two rival prison systems in the history of correction, Auburn and Pennsylvania prison system. We also have early forms of prison discipline that sometimes or some of them are still practiced today. So first is hard labor or productive work. So ngayon hindi na actually talaga hard labor na nakabilad sa araw, parang construction, hindi na po sila ganun in the modern times. More on work and livelihood programs na lang po. Yung mga talagang skills na pwedeng matutunan at magamit ng mga offenders sa loob ng kulungan na maaari nilang i-apply once they go back into the society. And then we have deprivation, cutting off of everything except for the bare necessities of existence. So you are deprived except of basic human needs. So maaaring deprived ka of the companies of other, ayun nga, solitary confinement lang, and so on. And then monotony, giving the same food that is off diet, or requiring the prisoners to perform drab or boring daily routine. So, paulit-ulit lang. Unlike in today's time, di ba, meron silang mga recreational activities that help stimulates the mind of the offenders inside prisons or jails. Kasi kung paulit-ulit lang ang ginagawa sa loob ng kulungan, mabobore yan. And then walang matututunan. And then parang nawawala yung responsibility as a person na dapat yung buhay mo is hindi nalalayo sa kung ano yung buhay sa labas, which is the aim of modern penology today, na even though they are separated from the general community, hindi pa rin dapat nalalayo yung how they live their life inside prison from outside prison walls. And then we have uniformity, where treating the prisoners alike. So the fault of one is the fault of all. So ibig sabihin, kahit na iisa lang ang nakapag-commit ng violation, ayan, mapaparusahan lahat. So sa uniformity, walang individualization. So same with the treatment. That's why they were proven ineffective during that time. Kasi parang iisa lang yung treatment program para sa lahat ng prisoners. So, hindi yan nagiging effective kasi iba-iba naman yung personality at pangangailangan ng mga taong ito, ng mga offenders na ito. So, that's why uniformity is not very effective when it comes to rehabilitation and treatment of offenders. Continuation of early forms of discipline, we have mass movement. So they do everything as a whole. Eating, recreation, pagligo, ayan. That's mass movement. And then we have degradation. Yan yung pinapahiya mo, yung mga prisoners sa loob ng kulungan. So you use insulting words or languages to break their confidence. And then corporal punishment, infliction of physical force para maka-experience ng pain or suffering itong particular inmates or yung mga inmates. So that's corporal punishment. And then lastly is isolation or po yan, solitary confinement. So no communication and then isolation and limited to no news of the outside. So yan yung parang tinatawag na Bartolina. Parang hindi ka nasisinagan ng araw, tapos wala kang balita kung ano ang nangyayari sa labas. So that's a form of prison discipline in the earlier times. Together with the study of corrections and institutional corrections is penology. So penology is the study of punishment for crime or of criminal offenders. So it was derived from the Latin word poena, which means pain or suffering. And it is also known as penal science. So penology is the study of control and prevention of crime through punishment of criminal offenders. So dito, tinitignan, pinag-aaralan under penal science or penology kung paano mape-prevent ang pag-commit ng further crimes ng mga criminals by using, ayan nga, punishment, like for example, imprisonment. So, madalas imprisonment in modern times. So, penal science or penology is a division of criminology that deals with prison management and the treatment of offenders. So, how is the prison managed? Paano pinapalakad? Ano yung mga concepts na ina-apply? Ano yung mga programs? Ayan, nasa penal science po pinag-aaralan yan. And how do you treat offenders to make sure na kapag lumabas sila, hindi na sila mag-engage in criminal activities. So that is also in the study of penal science. So penal science or penology, these two are the same. And then we have correction. So this refers to the confinement and treatment of adult offenders and juvenile delinquents. And we all know that it's a branch or it's one of the pillars of the criminal justice system. It is concerned with the custody, supervision, and rehabilitation of criminal offenders. Correction po is considered as the weakest pillar sa criminal justice system. Bakit kaya siya considered as weakest pillar? It's because of the reason na even though nakulong na, even though na-punish na itong particular person na to, paglabas niya ng kulungan, parang bumabalik din siya dun sa old criminal way of life. So that's why, asan yung parang goal, di ba? Hindi naman natupad ang goal ng corrections na matreat at ma-rehabilitate ang mga offenders. So that's why it's considered as the weakest pillar po, si corrections. So in the criminal justice system, we all know that it's the machinery of the government in addressing and controlling and preventing crimes and criminality. So we have 5 pillars. I think you are already familiar with that. So we have law enforcement or the police, we have prosecution, court, correction, and the community. So correction each have a relationship sa bawat pilar ng criminal justice system sa Pilipinas. At ito ang mga yon. So before we discuss yung relationship of corrections with the other pillars of the criminal justice system, yes, we know that it's the 4th pillar and it's the pillar or the branch of CJS that takes over kapag yung akusado is nakita or na-convicted as guilty na and magsaserve na po ng kanyang penalty or prison sentence. It is also responsible yun nga for the treatment and rehabilitation of offenders, either institutional or non-institutional agencies or facilities. So the offender could avail of the benefits of parole, yan po yung early release, or executive clemency, like for example, pardon, once he has served the minimum period of his sentence. So we will also be discussing that, I think, during the finals topics na po natin. So this is the relationship of corrections to the other pillars of the CJS. First is the police and corrections. So segregation and isolation of prisoners to project society are achieved through joint undertakings of corrections and police. So ang police po yan yung tumutulong mag-conduct ng background investigation para sa mga akusado na ginagamit ng court for probation and parole processes. So ang police din po nagpo-provide ng case referrals kasi sila yung humawak, 'di ba? Ng kaso ng mga offenders na ito. So this is the cooperation and coordination between corrections and the police. And then we have corrections and the prosecution. Kasi sa prosecution, ayan, dyan na isinasampa talaga yung mga naging kaso ng mga offenders. So sila po yung merong hawak ng criminal records and case history which is provided to the corrections facility for treatment programs of all prisoners. For them to know na ito ang criminal record and case history ni offender. So, kung ito yung record niya, dito dapat natin ibase kung ano yung proper individualized treatment na para sa kanya for it to be much more effective and successfully ma-rehabilitate at ma-treat itong offender na ito. So, that's corrections and the prosecution. And then we have the corrections and the court. So a convicted cannot be confined in prison or jail without the necessary court order. So yes po, tama po yun, no? Hindi ka naman pwedeng magkulong ng tao kung walang official court order or order from a competent court. So it is usually in form of a mittimus or a commitment order. So that's the relationship of court and correction. So, syempre, ang court din po ang nagbibigay ng prison term during the sentence if found guilty ng isang offender. And then lastly, corrections and the community. So to better address issues and concerns of rehabilitation programs, ang correction, it seeks help with the community support. So meron tayong mga religious groups na pumupunta sa loob ng kulungan para mag-conduct ng mga religious ceremonies like mass, di ba? And then we also have schools and the academy. So kasi nga, meron tayong mga educational programs sa loob ng kulungan na maaaring makatulong sa mga offenders na makatapos, lalong-lalo na yung mga bata pa, tapos hindi natapos ng high school. Say for example, 22 years old, ayan, pwede po sila dun sa ALS, di ba? Yung mga vocational courses ng TESDA. So that is how the community helps through education sa correction. And then we have professional and business group for job placement naman ng mga offenders once they go out of the prison or jail. Kasi paano ka ba makakatulong sa isang offender na masigurado mong paglabas niya ng kulungan is hindi na siya babalik into the criminal way of life. This is when you make sure na meron siyang pupuntahan na bahay, meron siyang pupuntahan or pwedeng ma-applyan na trabaho na pwede niyang pagkakitaan. So that's why they partner with professional and business groups and also the media and private sectors. So they all help the prison community, which aims to enhance the treatment and rehabilitation of offenders. So that is the relationship of each pillar of the criminal justice system and corrections po. And that ends our discussion for today. So questions? May mga katanungan ba tayo? Wala, syempre. Matatalino itong mga dash 1 na, ma'am, basic. So, kung wala po tayong tanong, pa-enable ng mga videos natin para makapag-take ako ng screenshot at para makapag-review na